The candle flickered in Martha Whitman's trembling hand. She stood before her bedroom door, the wooden planks groaning under the weight of the storm outside. On the other side, James Mallister waited, hat in his weathered hands, snow melting from his dark hair, those brown eyes holding promises that could damn them both. 3 years she'd worn widow's black, 3 years of whispered prayers and careful propriety in the small Wyoming town of Medicine Bow. But tonight, with the blizzard howling like the devil himself, propriety felt as distant as her dead husband's cold embrace. Jaime's voice came through the door, rough as prairie wind. "Martha, I can sleep in the barn. Just say the word." She pressed her forehead against the wood, feeling the heat radiating from his body on the other side. The whole town would know by morning. Sheriff Dawson would have his excuse. The Methodist ladies would have their scandal. And she would have this one night to remember when winter came again to her heart. Her hand moved to the latch. One twist, and 20 years of being the perfect widow would crumble into dust. 2 months earlier, Medicine Bow looked like every other railroad town carved from Wyoming dirt in desperate dreams. Martha stood behind the counter of her general store, tallying accounts with the precision of a woman who'd learned that numbers never lied. They never left. They never broke promises in the dark. The bell above her door chimed. She looked up and saw him, 6 feet of trouble in a worn leather coat, spurs singing against her wooden floor. James Mallister moved like water over stone, fluid and inevitable. His broad shoulders filled her doorway like he'd been measured for it. "Ma'am." He touched his hat brim, and Martha felt something she hadn't felt in 3 years, a flutter of butterfly wings low in her belly. "Heard you might know about land for sale in these parts." She watched his hands as he spoke. Strong hands, clean despite the calluses. Hands that looked like they could gentle a wild horse, or a woman who'd forgotten she was more than just a widow in black wool. "The Wilson Ranch has parcels," she heard herself say, her voice steadier than she felt. 60 acres, good water rights." When their eyes met, Martha saw something that made her breath catch. Not the hungry look of men who saw her as fresh game, but something deeper. Recognition, maybe. Like he was seeing past the severe bun and the high-button collar to the woman she'd buried beneath 3 years of grief. That Sunday, he appeared in the back pew of the Methodist church, hat respectfully removed, head bowed during Reverend Robinson's sermon about temptation. But when the congregation rose for Amazing Grace, Martha felt his gaze on her like warm honey, and she nearly forgot the words she'd sung 1,000 times. The irony wasn't lost on her. Amazing Grace indeed, looking directly at her from 20 feet away. After the service, as Martha lingered to arrange flowers on the altar, she heard his boots approach. Slow, measured steps of a man who'd learned patience the hard way. "Mrs. Whitman." His voice held the kind of respect that made her feel precious instead of pitied. That was beautiful singing. "Thank you, Mr. Mallister." He shifted his hat from hand to hand. "I was wondering, well, it's presumptuous, but would you happen to know where a man might get a decent Sunday meal?" "The boarding house is terrible," Martha finished, surprising herself with a smile. "Mrs. Patterson means well, but she could burn water." The invitation slipped out before propriety could stop it. "I always cook too much for just myself." And so began the slow, sweet dance of two hearts learning to trust again. In Martha's small kitchen, Jaime spoke of his mother's apple pie and the seminary he'd left to follow cattle trails. She told him about her husband, a good man but never one for conversation. The silence in her house had grown so heavy she sometimes spoke to her reflection just to hear a voice. "Loneliness is a peculiar thing," Jaime observed, helping her clear dishes, his sleeves rolled back to reveal strong forearms. "It can make you forget you're still alive." When their hands touched, reaching for the same plate, neither pulled away. The contact lasted 3 heartbeats, long enough for Martha to remember she had a pulse. October brought rumors on every prairie wind. Martha felt them in the way conversation stopped when she entered the mercantile, in the lingering stares during Sunday service, and in Sheriff Dawson's increasingly frequent visits to her store. "Mighty friendly with that drifter, aren't you, Martha?" Dawson's badge caught the lamplight as he leaned against her counter. Too close. Too familiar. "Man's got no roots here." Makes a person wonder. Martha's spine stiffened. Mr. Mallister is a customer, Sheriff. Nothing more. But even as she said it, she could feel the lie burning her tongue. Jaime was becoming much, much more. The whole town could see it in the way she started wearing blue instead of black, and how her hair had begun to escape its severe bun in soft tendrils that caught the light. The afternoon everything changed. It started with rain. Martha was visiting her husband's grave when the storm broke, sudden and vicious. She clutched her shawl, rushing toward an abandoned line shack when she saw him. Jaime emerged from the downpour like something from a fever dream, his shirt plastered to his chest, dark hair dripping. Without a word, he shrugged out of his coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. The warmth of his body still clung to the leather. They stood in that tiny shack, rain drumming the roof like a desperate heartbeat. Martha could smell him, leather and soap and something that made her pulse quicken. When she looked up, his brown eyes held a question that made her knees weak. Martha. Her name on his lips was a prayer and a curse. I should go. Should you? The question escaped before she could stop it. His hand rose slowly, his fingers tracing her cheek with the reverence of a man touching something sacred. You're the most beautiful woman I've ever seen. I'm 42 years old, she whispered, but didn't pull away. And I'm 28 and absolutely lost when I look at you. The kiss that followed was gentle as spring rain, desperate as a drought breaker. Martha's hands fisted in his wet shirt, pulling him closer, tasting 3 years of loneliness on his lips. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, she realized she was crying. This is madness, she breathed. Then I'm a madman, Jaime replied, pressing his forehead against hers. Because I'm falling in love with you, Martha Whitman, and I don't give a damn what this town thinks about it. But the town thought plenty. Within a week, the Methodist Ladies Auxiliary was meeting in urgent session. Sales at Martha's store dropped by half. Children were hurried past her house with hushed warnings about improper behavior. The pressure built like steam in a kettle. It all came to a head the night Sheriff Dawson cornered Jaime outside the saloon with 3 of his friends and a belly full of whiskey. Time you moved on, Mallister, Dawson drawled, his hand resting on his gun. Medicine bows got enough problems without drifters sniffing around decent widows. Jaime's response was quiet, calm, and dangerous as a coiled rattlesnake. I bought land here fair and square. As for Mrs. Whitman, she's a grown woman who can make her own choices. Not while I'm sheriff, she can't. The standoff lasted 10 heartbeats before Jaime tipped his hat and walked away. But Martha, watching from her store window, saw the fury in the rigid line of his shoulders. She saw the promise of violence in his measured steps. That night, the blizzard hit Medicine Bow like God's own judgment. Martha was banking her fire when she heard the desperate knocking. She opened it to find Jaime, snow-caked and shivering, leading his injured horse. I'm sorry, he said through chattering teeth. Duke stepped in a gopher hole. Can't make it to the boarding house. Martha didn't hesitate. Bring him to the lean-to. I'll get blankets. As she watched Jaime tend his horse with gentle confidence, Martha felt something shift inside her. A door she'd kept locked for 3 years was creaking open. This man wasn't just a disruption. He was the salvation she hadn't known she needed. Inside, she poured coffee with hands that shook only slightly. Jaime sat by her fireplace, steam rising from his damp clothes. I should probably go, he said, though neither of them moved. In this storm, you'd freeze before you reached the street. The unspoken truth hung between them. If he stayed, there would be no hiding it. If he left, he might not survive the night. Martha, her name was rough in his throat. If I stay, I know. She moved closer, drawn by invisible threads. I've been thinking about what you said, about not caring what the town thinks. She reached up, her fingers finding the top button of her high-neck dress. I've been thinking you might be right. The first button came undone, then the second. Jaime's eyes followed her movements like a man starving watches bread being broken. Martha, his voice held warning and want in equal measure. 3 years, she whispered, another button yielding. 3 years of being the perfect widow. Do you know what that means, Jaime? He shook his head, transfixed. It means I haven't been touched. Not tenderly, not like a woman instead of a duty. The dress opened, revealing the curve of her collarbone. It means I've forgotten what it feels like to be desired. Jaime rose from his chair like a man in a trance. His hands framed her face, thumbs tracing her cheekbones. You are desired, he said fiercely. Every Sunday in that church, I sit there wanting you so badly I can barely breathe. Every time I see you in that store, so proper and untouchable, I want to mess up that perfect hair and show you exactly how beautiful you are. Her hands found his chest, fingers splaying over the rapid beat of his heart. Show me now. The kiss was a storm, hunger and desperation, and 3 years of loneliness crashing together. Jaime's hands tangled in her hair, pins scattering as dark waves tumbled free. Martha's careful chignon became a wild cascade that made her look like a different woman. Younger, wilder, alive. She pulled at his shirt, desperate to feel skin against skin. He shrugged out of the damp fabric with urgent efficiency. Martha's breath caught at the sight of him. Broad shoulders, a lean waist, a scar across his ribs that spoke of violence survived. How? She whispered, tracing the mark. Broken bottle in a Denver saloon. Long story. His hands found the remaining buttons of her dress, working them free. Martha, are you sure? Because once we cross this line, I've been sure since the moment you walked into my store. The dress whispered to the floor. Jaime's sharp intake of breath was the most beautiful sound she'd ever heard. My God, he breathed. You're perfect. His hands traced her waist, the flare of her hips. When his mouth found the sensitive spot where her neck met her shoulder, Martha's knees nearly buckled. Jaime. His name was a prayer, a plea, a permission. They moved toward her bedroom. He paused by the narrow bed she'd shared with one man for 15 years, and no one since. Martha, I have to tell you something, he said, his voice vulnerable. You'd be my first. The admission hung between them, sweet and shocking. Martha reached up, cupping his face. And you'd be my second, she whispered. My choice this time. What followed was a rediscovery, a reclaiming. In Jaime's arms, Martha felt herself remade. Not a widow, a woman, claimed and claiming in return. Afterward, they lay entwined, listening to the blizzard rage outside. For those precious hours, the world contained only the two of them. But paradise never lasts long in places where angels fear to tread. Dawn brought judgment. Mrs. Adelaide Patterson, president of the Methodist Ladies Auxiliary, stood on Martha's porch, her eyes blazing with righteousness. Martha Whitman, your behavior last night was a disgrace to this community. By noon, Martha's store was empty. Her customers found other places to shop. Reverend Robinson paid a visit, his eyes full of disappointment. The man's using you, Martha. Once he's had what he wants, he'll move on like all his kind. The words hit like physical blows. Part of her, the part trained from birth to doubt her own worth, wondered if they might be true. That evening, Jaime found her sitting in her darkened store. Martha, he began, this is my fault. Don't, she said, meeting his eyes. What she saw there was not regret, but a pain that matched her own. Don't you dare apologize for last night. It was the first time in 3 years I felt alive. He crossed to her, pulling her into his arms. Then come with me. Marry me, Martha. Today, tomorrow, whenever you'll have me. She wanted to say yes so badly it hurt, but before she could speak, Sheriff Dawson's voice cut through the darkness. Well, the drifter's back. Dawson stepped from the shadows, hand on his gun, flanked by 3 of his cronies. I've been asking around about you, Mallister. Got a telegram from Sheriff Morrison up in Billings. Seems there was a married woman there, too. Things got ugly when her husband found out. Martha's world tilted. The scar, the talk of violence. Had she been a fool? Martha, it's not what he's making it sound like, Jaime pleaded. Sarah Morrison was being beaten. I helped her get away. Very touching, Dawson interrupted. Point is, you're trouble, Mallister, and this town has enough. The sheriff's hand moved to his gun. Martha saw how this would end. Violence. Blood on her floors. Jaime, dead or driven away. Stop, she commanded, stepping between them. All of you, stop. She faced Dawson, her voice cold as ice. You want to protect this town's morals? Fine, I'll make it easy for you. She walked to her cash register and pulled out the key to the store. She set it on the counter with a sharp clink. I'm leaving Medicine Bow tonight. There's nothing keeping me here anymore. Martha, no! Jaime's voice was raw. The building's paid for, she continued, ignoring him. Consider it a donation to the Methodist ladies. She turned to Jaime, memorizing his face. Thank you for reminding me I'm more than just a widow. Before he could respond, she walked to the back of the store. Don't let them win, he called after her. She paused at her doorway. They're not winning, Jaime. I am. For the first time in my life, I'm choosing my own path. The door closed behind her with quiet finality. But Martha Whitman didn't pack a bag. She didn't head for the train. She went to her late husband's roll-top desk, a piece of furniture she hadn't touched in 3 years. She ran her fingers along the dusty wood. Her husband had been a quiet man, a man of secrets. And Dawson's sudden, intense interest in her life, it wasn't just about propriety, it was something more. She found the hidden compartment at the back of the bottom drawer. It was something her husband had shown her once, years ago. For emergencies, he'd said. Inside there wasn't money. There was a small, leather-bound ledger. Her hands trembled as she opened it. The first few pages were records of store sales. But then the entries changed. Names, dates, amounts of money, and notes written in her husband's precise hand. Dawson, protection payment, $50 Robinson, sermon about temperance, as requested, $10 Patterson, information on Wilson land deal, $15. Her breath caught in her throat. This wasn't just a ledger. It was a record of every dirty secret in Medicine Bow. Her quiet, respectable husband had been the town's blackmailer. He'd been using his position as the storekeeper, the center of all commerce and gossip, to bleed the town's most powerful citizens dry. And Sheriff Dawson hadn't just been a bully. He'd been a victim. The final entry was dated the week before her husband's death. Dawson, threatening, says he's had enough. Worried. It wasn't a fever that took her husband. She knew that now. She knew it in her bones. A floorboard creaked in the store outside. She froze, clutching the ledger. Martha? It was Jaime's voice, soft and hesitant. She opened the door. He stood there, his face a mask of misery. Don't go, he pleaded. She held up the ledger. I'm not going anywhere, she said, her voice hard as steel. But he is. The final confrontation was not one of bullets, but of ink. The next morning, Martha and Jaime walked into Sheriff Dawson's office. They didn't go in shouting. They went in with the quiet confidence of people holding all the cards. Martha placed the ledger on Dawson's desk. I believe this belongs to you, she said. The sheriff's face went white as he recognized the book. He looked from the ledger to Jaime, then to the determined set of Martha's jaw. He knew the game was over. What do you want? He rasped. Justice, Martha said simply. For my husband, and for your victims. She opened the book to the last page. My husband was afraid of you, and then he died. Funny how that works. It was an accident, Dawson blustered. We had an argument. He fell. And the town doctor, who I see also received regular payments, was happy to sign off on a fever? Martha's voice was cold. Dawson deflated, the fight gone from him. He was trapped. Here's the deal, Jaime said, his voice a low growl. You're going to resign. You're going to pack your bags and ride out of this territory. And you're never coming back. If I ever see your face again, this ledger goes straight to the U.S. Marshal in Cheyenne. The same choice was offered to Reverend Robinson and Mrs. Patterson. Faced with public exposure of their hypocrisy and corruption, they folded. Within a week, Medicine Bow had a new reverend, a new leader of the Methodist ladies, and a temporary sheriff. His name was James Mallister. The town, free of its rotten core, began to heal. People started talking to each other again, not in whispers, but in the open. The fear that had kept them divided was gone. 6 months later, Martha stood in the doorway of her thriving general store. A new sign hung above the door. Whitman and Mallister. Ready? Jaime's voice came from behind her. He wrapped his arms around her waist, his hand resting on her gently rounded belly. Ready, she whispered, leaning back against him. They were married that afternoon, not in the church, but in the town square, surrounded by the entire community. It was a celebration of new beginnings. for them and for the town they had saved. Martha Whitman's story became a legend in those parts. A tale of a widow who found love, a drifter who found a home, and a town that found its soul. It's a reminder that sometimes the greatest courage isn't in fighting your enemies, but in having the strength to choose your own path, no matter what the world thinks. If this story of second chances moved you, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more tales from the American frontier, where hearts are as wild and unpredictable as the land itself.